Ladies and gentlemen, Asian guy here. Stop what you're doing right now. Put down your phone. Turn off the news. Because what I'm about to show you didn't come from CNN. It didn't come from Fox News. It came from a single classified State Department document that crossed my desk exactly 20 minutes ago. A document marked with the highest security clearance. A document that proves the United States government just made a deal that changes everything we thought we knew about American foreign policy. This isn't speculation. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is a paper trail that leads directly to the highest levels of the State Department. And what it reveals about Venezuela, about oil, about the dollar, and about the desperation of the American empire will make your blood run cold. Let me start with what everyone thinks they know. The surface story is simple. On the record, the United States maintains sanctions against Venezuela. Nicolas Maduro is a dictator. His government is illegitimate. American companies cannot do business there. American banks cannot process Venezuelan transactions. This has been the official policy for over 5 years. But the document I'm looking at right now tells a very different story. It shows that while the Biden administration has been publicly condemning Maduro, they have been privately negotiating with him. Not through normal diplomatic channels, not through the United Nations, through a network of shell companies, intermediary banks, and offshore legal structures that would make a money launderer blush. The deal involves oil. Specifically, it involves Venezuelan heavy crude being shipped to American refineries through a complex web of third-party nations. Listen to how this actually works. The oil leaves Venezuela labeled as Colombian. It gets processed and relabeled in Trinidad. It gets refined in Houston refineries. And the money flows back through a series of Caribbean banks that specialize in exactly the kind of high-risk transactions that the U.S. Treasury Department supposedly monitors around the clock. But here's where things stop making sense. The same administration that froze Venezuelan government assets worth $12 billion just signed off on a mechanism that allows Maduro to access American financial markets. The same Treasury Department that sanctioned Venezuelan officials for corruption just approved a system that lets those same officials move money through New York banks. This doesn't happen by accident. You don't accidentally create a billion-dollar sanctions evasion scheme. You don't accidentally negotiate with a government you claim is illegitimate. Someone authorized this. Someone at the highest levels of government decided that the public policy of the United States and the private policy of the United States were going to be two completely different things. The question is why? Why would the Biden administration risk a massive political scandal to cut a deal with Nicolas Maduro? Why would they create a system that undermines their own sanctions? Why would they give Maduro access to American dollars at the exact moment when they're supposed to be strangling his economy? The answer lies in the numbers. Numbers that the Energy Department doesn't want you to see. Numbers that reveal just how desperate the United States has become for reliable oil supplies. Since the Russia sanctions began, American refineries have been struggling to replace Russian heavy crude. Russian oil was cheap, it was reliable, and it was perfectly suited for the complex refining infrastructure that American companies spent decades building. When that supply disappeared overnight, the refineries had to scramble to find alternatives. Venezuelan heavy crude is almost perfectly identical to Russian heavy crude. Same sulfur content, same viscosity, same refining requirements. But there was one insurmountable problem. Venezuela was under U.S. sanctions. American companies couldn't buy it. American banks couldn't finance it. American refineries couldn't process it. Unless, of course, someone created a workaround. A legal framework that allowed Venezuelan oil to flow to American refineries without technically violating sanctions. A system so complex and so carefully structured that it could operate in plain sight while maintaining plausible deniability for everyone involved. The document shows that this system has been operational for at least 6 months. 6 months of Venezuelan oil flowing into American refineries. 6 months of American dollars flowing into Venezuelan accounts. 6 months of the United States government publicly condemning a regime while privately doing business with it. But the oil is just the beginning. Because when you start following the money, you discover that this deal isn't just about energy. It's about the dollar. It's about maintaining American financial dominance in a world where that dominance is under attack from every direction. Venezuela sits on the largest proven oil reserves in the entire world. Larger than Saudi Arabia, larger than Iraq, larger than Iran, larger than Kuwait combined. For decades, those reserves have been priced in dollars. Venezuelan oil sales have supported demand for American currency. Venezuelan energy exports have propped up the petrodollar system. When sanctions cut Venezuela out of the dollar system, those reserves didn't disappear. They just started being priced in other currencies. Chinese yuan, Russian rubles, Iranian rials. Every barrel of Venezuelan oil sold outside the dollar system was a barrel that weakened American monetary hegemony. The secret deal brings Venezuelan oil back into the dollar system. Not officially, not publicly, but functionally. Every transaction flows through American banks. Every payment gets processed in American dollars. Every barrel reinforces the currency that the Federal Reserve creates out of thin air. This is why the deal exists, not because the Biden administration suddenly decided that Maduro was acceptable, not because American foreign policy changed overnight, but because the dollar needed Venezuelan oil more than American politics needed Venezuelan sanctions. But there's a deeper layer to this story, a layer that reveals just how much the global balance of power has shifted in the last 2 years. The document doesn't just show that the United States made a deal with Venezuela. It shows that the United States was forced to make a deal with Venezuela. The language is careful. The terms are defensive. This wasn't a negotiation between equals. This was a desperate American government accepting whatever terms Maduro was willing to offer. Maduro demanded guarantees. He demanded legal immunity for Venezuelan officials. He demanded access to frozen Venezuelan assets. He demanded protection from future sanctions. And according to the document, he got most of what he asked for. The United States, the country that claims to be the global hegemon, the country that tells other nations how to run their governments, just agreed to protect a dictator from its own sanctions in exchange for oil access. The empire just admitted that it needs Venezuelan crude more than it needs Venezuelan regime change. This represents a fundamental shift in American foreign policy. For 70 years, the United States has used economic sanctions as a primary tool of international pressure. The threat of being cut off from American markets, from American banks, from American currency was enough to force most countries into compliance. But sanctions only work if the target country has no alternatives. If they can't access American markets, but they can't access Chinese markets, the sanctions become irrelevant. If they can't use American banks, but they can use Russian banks, the financial pressure disappears. Venezuela found alternatives. China became their largest trading partner. Russia provided military support. Iran shared sanctions evasion techniques. Turkey provided financial services. The sanctions didn't collapse the Venezuelan government. They just forced it to build relationships with America's enemies. And now the United States is discovering that sanctioning Venezuela hurt America more than it hurt Venezuela. American refineries need Venezuelan crude. American energy companies need Venezuelan partnerships. American banks need Venezuelan transaction volume. The secret deal represents the United States climbing down from its position of strength. It represents an acknowledgement that American economic power has limits. It represents the beginning of a world where the United States has to negotiate instead of dictate. But the implications go far beyond Venezuela. If the United States will secretly negotiate with Maduro, who else are they secretly negotiating with? If they will create sanctions evasion schemes for Venezuelan oil, what other sanctions are being quietly undermined? The document raises questions about Iran, about North Korea, about Russia. If American foreign policy operates on two levels, the public level and the secret level, how do we know what American foreign policy actually is? More importantly, if the United States is willing to undermine its own sanctions, when those sanctions become economically painful, what does that say about American credibility? What does that say about American threats? What does that say about American power? The markets are starting to ask these questions. The dollar index has been weakening for weeks, not because of inflation, not because of interest rates, but because confidence in American financial dominance is eroding. The secret Venezuela deal is just the latest evidence that the American empire is making desperate choices. When empires start making desperate choices, they start making mistakes, big mistakes. The kind of mistakes that reveal their weaknesses to their enemies, the kind of mistakes that encourage other countries to test American resolve. China is watching this Venezuelan deal very carefully. They're studying every detail. They're learning that American sanctions can be negotiated around. They're learning that American threats are often empty bluffs. They're learning that American power has very real limits. Russia is watching too. They're seeing that the United States needs their traditional allies more than those allies need American approval. They're seeing opportunities to exploit American desperation. The secret Venezuela deal isn't just about oil. It's about the credibility of American power, and that credibility is starting to crack. The timing of this deal is particularly revealing. It comes at the exact moment when the Federal Reserve is struggling to maintain confidence in the dollar, when American inflation is destroying working-class savings, when American debt is approaching unsustainable levels. The Biden administration didn't want to make this deal. They were forced to make it by economic reality. Economic reality forced them to abandon their political principles. The desperate need for cheap energy forced them to embrace a dictator they publicly despise. This is what decline looks like. Not a dramatic collapse, not a military defeat on foreign soil, just a series of quiet compromises. A series of backdoor deals that contradict official policy. A series of desperate admissions that the world has changed and American power has diminished. The Venezuelan deal proves that the United States can no longer afford to maintain its ideological foreign policy. It can no longer afford to cut itself off from strategic resources for political reasons. It can no longer afford to treat economic sanctions as cost-free diplomatic tools. The world is fragmenting into competing blocs. The Chinese bloc, the Russian bloc, the American bloc, and the American bloc is discovering that it's smaller and weaker than it thought. Countries are choosing sides based on economic interest rather than political alignment. Venezuela chose China and Russia because they offered better deals. Other countries will make similar calculations. The secret Venezuela deal is an admission that the United States is losing the economic competition, that American markets are no longer indispensable, that American financial systems are no longer irreplaceable. But the most troubling aspect of this story isn't what the document reveals. It's what the document suggests about the documents we haven't seen. If the United States is secretly dealing with Venezuela, what other secret deals exist? What other sanctions are being quietly circumvented? What other compromises are being made behind closed doors? How many times has American foreign policy been privately negotiated while being publicly maintained? How many times has the Biden administration said one thing to voters while doing something completely different with foreign governments? The Venezuela document creates a credibility crisis that extends far beyond Latin American policy. It raises questions about everything, every sanction, every threat, every promise. If American foreign policy operates through secret deals that contradict public statements, then American foreign policy has no credibility at all. Allies can't trust American commitments. Enemies can't fear American threats. Global markets can't price American intentions. And the entire world order starts to unravel. This is how empires end, not with dramatic collapses, not with military defeats, but with quiet admissions that their power was never as real as everyone believed. The secret Venezuela deal is one of those admissions. An acknowledgement that the United States needs dictators more than dictators need the United States. An admission that economic desperation trumps political principles. A confession that American power has been hollowed out from within. The question now is whether this was an isolated deal or the beginning of a pattern. Whether the Biden administration will continue to quietly abandon its stated foreign policy goals when those goals become economically inconvenient. The answer to that question will determine whether the United States remains a global superpower or becomes just another country making desperate deals to survive in a multipolar world. The Venezuela document suggests we already know the answer. The American empire is negotiating its own decline, one secret deal at a time, one quiet compromise after another.